Hi, this is Scott Wilkinson, host of Home Theater Geeks. In episode 277, I chat with calibrator Dave Abrams about the changing world of video and calibration. So stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Home Theater Geeks is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This is Home Theater Geeks with Scott Wilkinson, recorded October 9th, 2015. Episode 277, Video in Flux. This episode of Home Theater Geeks is brought to you by Harry's. For guys who want a great shave experience for a fraction of what you're paying now, go to harrys.com. Get $5 off your first purchase by entering the code HTG when you check out. And by Epson's new EcoTank printers. With Epson's line of SuperTank all-in-one printers, you can print thousands of documents without running out of ink. EcoTank is loaded and ready to print when you are. Visit epson.com/EcoTank to find out more. Hey there, Scott Wilkinson here, the Home Theater Geek and editor of avsforum.com. This week's guest geek is David Abrams, a well-known and well-respected video calibrator here in LA. And we're going to be talking about the state of calibration and a video. Hey, David, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Scott. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Thank you for being here. Those of you who are tuned in live at live.twit.tv or logged into the chat room at irc.twit.tv can post questions for David and me as we go along, and I'll pass along as many as I can. So we're here today to talk about the state of the union, so to speak, the state of video in consumer and professional worlds, and particularly the state of calibration. David, you're a calibrator. You work both with consumer products and with professional products in studios, right?
Yes. Most of our work is video calibration, and predominantly these days, it happens to be mostly with the studios here in Los Angeles, with the studios here in Hollywood, but we still do quite a bit of our business with end users, customers, home theater geeks all the time.
Good. Well, it's really important to talk about what happens in the studios because that's where the content is created. And as I always say, I've said for many, many years, that what you want at home is as close a reproduction of what they're seeing when they create the content in the studio as you possibly can at home, which is not the way most TVs come out of the box.
That's correct. No, actually, most TVs come out of the box pretty poorly optimized when it comes to standards. Now, if you're trying to hit a specific target, as many manufacturers are for that showroom, then they're coming out of the box just as they want them. But in terms of image accuracy and that overall getting the content from the studio to B, the Blu-ray disc, to see that TV and having the exact same image happen for you that they saw at the studio, no, they don't come out of the box very close to that at all.
Right, which is why I always recommend, at the very least, what you want to do is go into the menu system. It's not scary. You're not going to break anything. And go into one parameter that's normally called picture mode and select the picture mode that says probably movie or cinema or something like that. That's going to get you closer to what we call the system standards, closer to what the content creators saw in their grading lab or their mastering suite than what it will look like coming out of the box. It isn't always called movie or cinema, but usually, isn't it, David?
Yeah, almost always it's called movie or cinema. Trying to think off the top of my head. I don't think that there's many others. Every now and then you'll see, like, the older Panasonic displays had the THX mode, and the THX mode was sort of the substitute for the movie mode. But these days it's mostly movie or cinema. And you're absolutely right. If you do choose the movie or the cinema mode straight out of the box, you've already gotten quite a bit of the way there. It's not usually perfect. There's part tolerances and there's things they can't take into account. And any good calibrator isn't just going to adjust the display itself. They're going to continue on and check all your sources, make sure that the image processing is set up properly in your receiver or your Blu-ray player. Make sure that if you want 422 color out of the Blu-ray player, because that is a little more accurate on your specific system, they're going to check that. So there's a lot more to it than simply adjusting the display. But if you were to put the display in movie mode, you've already taken yourself, up a huge step in accuracy from what you might have had just taking it out of the box and watching it in the dynamic mode or the sport mode.
Right. Or sometimes called the vivid mode, which is so weird because so many people, uneducated, and I don't mean ignorant or stupid by any means, just uneducated, they will pull it out, they'll see the vivid mode, and they'll go, wow, that's so cool. I mean, that's so bright and vivid. and they like it. And when I say, no, put it in the movie mode, they do. And then they go, oh, that looks kind of dull and dim and it doesn't look very good. And what my recommendation is, just wait a little while. Live with it for a little while. You will get used to it and then you will appreciate it. Do you find that with your customers?
I find that exact same thing with my customers. And one of my customers who actually is in this industry, I won't name names, but he's in the audio video industry and he has a bunch of exotic cars. And he decided to let me drive one after we did a calibration once. I had a flight to catch, but he said, you've got some extra time. Let's go out in one of them. And the perfect analogy was made. If you're driving a normal car like what I have, a Volkswagen GTI, every day you think, oh, this car handles pretty well. It's got good enough pep. It corners okay. But then you get in a Ferrari and you drive the Ferrari and you say, oh my gosh, this thing takes off like a rocket and it corners. Oh, it's just a whole different experience. And if you've ever driven a Ferrari or Lamborghini or like an Audi R8, you know what I'm talking about. So once I drove the Ferrari, and I landed back in LA and I got in my Volkswagen, I was sad. For like that first day, I went, this stinks. This is not very exciting. But after a couple of days, I got back used to my Volkswagen and all of a sudden I said, this is fun again. This is fun again. I think it's just like that with a TV and a calibration. You might be used to something that's very vivid, or you might be used to something that's dull or something that's more enhanced. And then once you have that calibration, it's going to be different. And the first thing our minds like to do is compare it to what we know. And what you knew is what you were just watching. And once you've now taken that out of the equation and you make that change to this new picture and you're comparing it, you're gonna think, oh, well, this is now too dull or it's too bright or it's too dark. But if you start thinking about the image as, what should this image look like? What was the director intending? If they're outside running through a bright sunny day and they're running through some grass or some flowers, is that what that day might look like? Do flesh tones look natural? I'm very, very pale. Would I look this pale or would I look sunburnt? And so you try to look at things in nature that and I tell my customers, try to compare it to what you know and what the director's going for. And I think you'll find things look very natural. And it never fails. Every single one of them that I follow up with has said after a few days, like, oh my gosh, I love it. Even the wife has noticed a difference most of the time. And that's always the really nice, the nice thing to hear, because you always hear people saying, oh, well, if the wife sees a difference, I know we won. So.
Right, exactly. Now, this isn't to say that calibrating a TV is going to take it from a Ferrari to a Volkswagen.
No.
Right. that part of the analogy doesn't quite work. But the analogy, I think, makes a very good point, which is what you're used to. And when you get something different, you notice right away whether it's something better or something not as good or just something different. It may be better or not better, but it's different. And we as humans, I think, really sort of react negatively to change very often.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
But I think the point is very well taken that if you do get a calibration, or even just select movie mode, but that's the first step, You know, it's gonna be different. You might say, "Oh, I don't like that so much," but then, as you say, afterwards, after a while, you get used to it. It looks more natural. Leo Laporte said the same thing to me when I calibrated. I calibrated 2 TVs of his. He has a Panasonic, I think it's a GT50 plasma, one of the last couple of years of plasma, and the first Samsung OLED. And I calibrated the Panasonic, which is larger. And, you know, at first he said, "Oh man, the grass just doesn't look, you know, like it's all dull and, you know, it doesn't." And I said, "Just live with it, live with it." And now he says, "You know, now I see. I look out the window and I see my grass, and I look at the TV and I look at that grass, and they look very much more the same than they did before." So he recognized it.
Absolutely. And if you give it that few days and you even just watch the movie mode for a few days, and then you pause on an image and you switch to that vivid mode, you really see how enhanced it is. You really see the color shift because you've gotten yourself trained to that other image, and then all of a sudden it's, whoa, I was watching that before. That doesn't look natural at all. So you can kind of train your brain and then make that step. And I think when you make the step the opposite way, when you're in that vivid mode for a few days and you ship to movie, sure, it might be a little more dull, you know, not as enhanced, maybe not as bright, because usually the movie mode has the backlight turned down a little bit more, and the gamma is usually a little bit slower because it's more towards the standard. But even if you were to make that change, you don't go, "Oh my gosh, what a difference. It looks so not real." Whereas the other direction, when you go to that vivid mode, you go, "Whoa, that kind of looks neon green grass, and I can see all the edge enhancement on, you know, the hairs on their head," and that kind of thing starts to happen. So
Yep, exactly right. And yet here we are talking about looking at a TV and looking out the window and seeing if they're similar or not. And yet we know that the current TV standard, the high definition HD TV standard that we have known now for 10 years or more, does not represent reality completely. No TV system really can, at least not yet. But the one for HD TV has a pretty limited range of colors. And so, for example, there are certain colors of red that it can't reproduce and certain colors of green that it can't reproduce. And there's also the limited amount of dynamic range. And I've talked many, many times on this show and on Leo's show about high dynamic range being the next big thing. And it really is, because it takes the deepest black and the brightest white and expands them away from each other, giving you more of a sense of what you can actually see outside. What we can see outside with our eyes in the real world, the dynamic range is very wide. But on a TV, it probably never will get to be that wide, but it can be wider than it is, making a more accurate reflection of reality. And that's really what I wanted to talk with you about today, are these new high dynamic range standards. I'm not even sure. I guess you could call them that, but there's more than one, which is always a bad thing in my opinion. And what I really wanted to ask you about today was calibrating for these new high dynamic range TVs that are just starting to come out, that also have a wider color gamut. That is a range of colors that you can perceive. And it must give you as a calibrator fits to, you know, you've honed your skill, you know exactly what you're doing. Is it so clear cut now as we move into the era of high dynamic range and wide color gamut?
You know, Scott, that's a great question. It's not. It really isn't. The whole system is shifting in this completely different direction from what us calibrators are used to. So we're used to having a standard in front of us, and we're used to taking out our equipment and putting up some test patterns and measuring those patterns and making adjustments to hit what the standard says it should hit. Now, as we move to these newer formats, it's really brilliant what they're doing. It's sort of the way it should be. And if you're a calibrator, you're a video engineer, you're someone working in the industry, I think you're very excited about it, because we're starting to get to a standard or a format that allows us to maximize the technology that we have. So for example, if something is mastered in current HD TV standards, let's say Rec. 709 with a BT 1886 gamma or electro-optical transfer function curve, we calibrate all the sets we have now to that standard, but the sets we have now might be able to do a lot bigger standard. So what we're finding is that the Samsung TVs on the market, the LGs, the Sony, pretty much anything you buy on the market today can do more than Rec. 709 can do. It has a deeper shade of red, a deeper shade of green, a deeper shade of blue, and the gamma can change, and the light output is a lot better than what our Rec. 709 standards, are. Right now, a TV, an HD TV, is supposed to be around 100 candelas or 100 nits, and a lot of the TVs can do, even not the non-high dynamic range sets, can do 200, 300, 400 nits, no problem. And yet, we're not using that capability if we're targeting our specific standard. We're trying to go right by the letter of that law. But with something like Dolby Vision, we are moving to a format that allows it to take advantage of new technologies as they develop. So, and to elaborate a little more on that, Dolby Vision changes the way we calibrate, in that we're not calibrating to a specific target. We're calibrating to what Dolby likes to call the golden reference. So Dolby will master content. We have to have content mastered in high dynamic range, right? In order to watch it in high dynamic range, we can't just take our HD TV signal and throw it on high dynamic range and say, it's high dynamic range. But
because as I've always said, that's a distortion of what the content actually is.
Absolutely, absolutely. If you watch something in standard def in Rec. 709, that was mastered standard def for Rec. 709, then you're altering the signal. It's not how it was mastered. You've now added a little bit of a curve to it, and vice versa. If you were to watch something mastered for digital cinema in Rec. 709 without properly converting that, well, you're going to end up with the same exact, you're going to end up with a curve, not the exact curve from the two, but you will end up with a shift because of that. But with Dolby Vision, they master the content. Right now, they're trying to master content, from what they tell me, at 4,000 nits with what's called P3 color gamut, which is what is used in digital cinema when you're mastering digital cinema, and the SMPTE PQ electro-optical transfer function. And then by the
way, before you go any further, let me just make sure everybody understands all of that. Rec. 709 is a range of colors, a certain red, green, and blue point, and the electro-optical transfer function, or gamma, determines how the TV outputs light in response to the signal coming in. So if the signal coming in says, I want you to be full black, then it's not supposed to output any light at all. If it says, I want you just a little bit above black, and then a little more, and then a little more, and then a little more, how does the TV's light output respond to that? And there are all kinds of different ways you can do that. Up until now, it's been with what's called a gamma curve. But PQ, perceptual quantization, or perceptual quantizer is what that stands for, is a different way to define how a TV responds to the signal coming in saying, I want this much light, I want that much light. And so I just wanted to make sure everybody was on the same page and understanding what we're talking about here.
Absolutely, absolutely. So with what they're mastering now, though, they are able to take that content. Let's say they mastered it at 4,000 nits, like they're saying. Well, the Vizio set, I think, that just was announced and shown off this week in New York, I think they rate that at 800 nits. Well, you say, well, wait a sec. If I master it at 4,000 nits and now I'm watching it at 800 nits, how can I be watching the same thing? But the format is actually designed to scale for the different capabilities of different displays. So if you had a display, let's say you had a high dynamic range set that could only do Rec. 709 color, but then you had a high dynamic range set, again, a Dolby Vision set, let's say, because we're talking about that format, that could do Rec. 2020 color, which is significantly larger than Rec. 709. Well, Dolby's format will actually remap the color on that individual TV so that you're seeing as good as it can be in Rec 709, and you're also seeing as good as it could be in Rec 2020. So
from the same content. This is incredible.
From the same content. So over time, let's say I bought a TV today and I bought the Vizio, and the Vizio is X capable. And I start getting my movie titles, I start watching movies. Well, the metadata is there, and the process that they use is there, where that movie is going to look as good as it can on what the Vizio can do today. But let's say 5 years down the road, Vizio now has a new model out, right? Technology gets better and Vizio doesn't sit still. They're going to keep making new displays and trying to improve on those displays. So they now have a new model out that instead of 800 nits, it's doing 2000 nits. Oh, and they've also increased the color gamut mapping, the color volume, let's say, of the display, because a lot of people are referring to now, they're talking about luminance and they're talking about everything in terms of color volume, the new hip term.
Right.
Not that it couldn't be used before, but everyone's sort of referring it to that way because high dynamic range talks a lot about the luminance. So they get a larger color volume. Well, now do I have to rebuy my library? Well, Dolby tells us no. They say no, our format is scalable. So it will have the metadata there that the TV can then take advantage of. So the TV just then takes advantage of this additional data, this additional capability, and just remaps the movie into this better picture that you can now do. Whereas in the past, we've said, oh, well, this new, let's say Vizio, because we're talking about Vizio at the moment, this new Vizio M series can do, P3. But why would I need that as a consumer? I don't have any P3 content. I need to set it to Rec 709. So I set it to Rec 709, and I essentially throw away some of the capability of that set simply because everything was mastered and everything should be watched in this other format. So as these formats move, and digital cinema has worked with this quite a bit. CapXYZ Space and in digital cinema is a scalable color format as well. And
ACES is another one that we've talked about on this show.
ACES is another one. Yeah. So it's been in the broadcast world for a while now, and it's finally trickling down the pipe all the way into our consumer world. I'm extremely excited about it. And I think most people in the AV geek world would be excited about it. But when we come to calibration, because we now have this whole different format, we're no longer calibrating to Rec 709. Well, you might say, well, Dave, what do you calibrate to? Because what do you want to make sure red measures when you set red during the calibration? If it can move, right? If it's a Samsung, it might be here. If it's a Vizio, it might be there. If it's an LG, it might be there. So what do you shoot for? Well, Dolby has what they call a golden reference. So they're working with the manufacturers, and they come up with a target, a color target, a calibration target, let's say, on a per display basis. So it'll be a model line. It's not going to be like serial number 1275, it has this. But they're going to look at it and they're going to come out with a golden reference for a model line. And then you'll have that target. And they're building into these models in their, image processing that they're doing, the Dolby Vision Mojo that they do, the color conversion to make it look right on that product, provided that product is hitting the golden reference target. So there will still be the same thing we see now in displays where, we had sets with THX mode and Panasonic, and we have sets with the movie mode that we've talked about. And those are a lot closer to calibration. And Dolby, I think, just like THX, just like a lot of these, the ISF modes on TVs, of course, all of those are going to try to hit that target. So I think Dolby will try to have manufacturers off the assembly line have their golden reference Dolby Vision mode close to what the target is. But there's tolerances and there's everything we see today in trying to do that. You measure 10 vivid modes of 10 of the same model, and they all measure a little bit different. You know what I'm talking about because you've reviewed thousands of TVs. And I think you're still going to have that. Because there's not much you can do about the tolerances in manufacturing. But at least out of the box, they're hoping to get it, hey, this is the golden reference. We know that this is what this monitor can do. And now if you're a calibrator in the field, like myself, you can look up that standard. You can get that standard, and you can then say, okay, I'm going to adjust your set to this. And then you're going to see it just as Dolby wanted you to.
It's fascinating to me that with Dolby Vision, you're going to have sort of a different target from one TV to the next, calibration target. You know, so you're going to go in, you're going to see a Vizio, you're going to look up the Vizio target, and you're going to calibrate to that. You go into a different home and you see a Samsung, you're going to look up that target, and it's going to be different. But you're going to calibrate that set to that. That's very interesting. It's nothing we've ever done before.
It's nothing we've ever done before. Certainly not not in the consumer world. In the broadcast space, it's been done, right? But in the consumer electronics world, no, we haven't really done it before. But it allows you to maximize the capability of your display. So as the display gets better, instead of rewriting the standard and waiting, you know, I think Rec 709. If you look at the original Rec 709, I think it's 1990, 1991. It was written, and of course we're still using it in 2015. And it's got a couple amendments, right? There's like Rec 709-1, -2, a couple changes that have happened over the years. But for the most part, you know, we've had it so long, and technology at first couldn't do it. When HDTVs came out, you know, we'd measure them and be, oh, it can't quite hit the color. Oh, it can't quite hit, you know, what we'd like to in gamma. It can't quite hit the 100 nits. Maybe even a lot of the old CRTs couldn't hit the 100 nits. Right. And now we've got TVs that not only can hit it most of the time, but they can actually exceed it.
Yes.
And we're just not using that. So again, you know, Dolby Vision is about maximizing the capability, bringing that next generation of display to us. And I think that, you know, at least what I've seen so far in the product demos, it's not, you know, it's not very abundant right now. The Vizio hasn't even started shipping, but in the product demos you go to, and of course the studios around Hollywood, the demonstrations are very impressive. And I think it's a very good place to be. But I do think calibrators are going to need to learn how to go about this method. To that end, though, you know, companies like SpectraCal already have in their latest build on their website the Vizio Dolby Vision Golden reference built into CalMan. So if you're a CalMan user, it's already there on the version. I think it came out a few days ago, and they're ready. And they plan to continue updating the software with new golden references as they become available for models as they ship.
Yeah. Well, we're going to look a little deeper into SpectraCal and CalMan in a moment. But if you'll pardon me for just a sec, I'd like to thank one of our sponsors for this episode, which is Harry's. Harry's is fixing a problem most of us have: paying too much for overpriced razors. Let's admit it, shaving isn't fun. Sometimes we cut or scrape ourselves with dull blades, and razors are expensive. They run about $4 a blade. A guy who shaves every day spends hundreds of dollars a year just on razors, like the Gillette Fusion, for example. And when we go to the store to buy them, sometimes we have to deal with those pesky locked-up plexiglass cabinets. What's up with that? What a pain. Well, there's a company that's fixing all of that for us. It's called Harry's. Harry's gives us high-quality razors at about half the price of those big brand blades. Harry's makes their razors in their own factory in Germany, and they engineer them for sharpness and high performance. Even better, Harry's ships them for free to your front doorstep. And because they make and ship their own blades, Harry's is a more efficient company, which means they can give us factory direct pricing. Harry's guarantees your satisfaction. In each kit, you get a razor with a handle that looks and feels great, 3 razor blades, and foaming shave gel. All you have to do is check out harrys.com/products for all that. The starter Truman set is an amazing deal. You get all this for just $15. They also have some new aftershave moisture that protects and hydrates the skin, which is very cool. So go to harrys.com and get $5 off your first purchase with the code HTG. That's HARRYS.com, and enter the code HTG at checkout. And we thank Harry's very much for their support of Home Theater Geeks. Now, David, you might want to check out Harry's, since you actually do the head shaving thing.
I do.
and you know, it might be something worth checking out. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out. Maybe it'll help me get rid of some of my razor burn.
There you go. So yeah, I bet you it will. So we were talking about Dolby Vision, and we were talking about SpectraCal CalMan, which is one of the software packages that many calibrators use, even those who aren't professional calibrators, but rather enthusiasts at home, which are many of the Home Theater Geeks audience, they actually invest in the Calman software and a meter of some sort to actually go in and do-it-yourself calibration. That to do it right really requires some pretty sophisticated and expensive equipment and some serious training. So I don't recommend, necessarily doing this on a very casual basis. But those of us who are real enthusiasts, they want to get their hands dirty and check it out. So we have some images from the new Calman workflow, as they call it, which is workflow is simply, a procedure for doing this, then this, then this, and then the next thing for calibrating your TV. And so let's take a look at some of those. And David, you can tell us what we're looking at here. Here's number one.
So this is actually very important. So right now, the way Dolby Vision works, it can actually compress the 12-bit signal into the 8-bit RGB space. And you can actually pass it through a lot of what's capable in HDMI 2.0 today. You don't need a 2.0A to necessarily do Dolby Vision. Now, when 2.0A comes out, they say, they're going to be completely compliant and everything, but you can actually do it today. And you have to make sure that the RGB signal, right, the Dolby Vision signal gets from the source to the display properly. If anything happens, if it gets converted, let's say a receiver converts that RGB to YUV or YCBCR space for image processing, then converts back to RGB, the metadata is going to be lost. So
man, I rail about this all the time, that if you're going to have a high dynamic range source, and there are now some streaming sources, and there's some boxes that'll do it at one point. The Ultra HD Blu-ray players will certainly do it. You pass that via HDMI through an AV receiver, and the AV receiver better not mess with that signal, or it's not going to get to the TV. And what you're saying here is that for Dolby Vision, which doesn't need HDMI 2.0A, as you point out, and that's really good news, but if you pass your source device through a receiver, say, and it does something, anything really, then that Dolby Vision data is lost, and what you will see on your TV is standard dynamic range.
Yes. Yeah. So unfortunately, that's where we are today. Now, as technology develops, maybe things will change, especially with HDMI 2.0, but 2.0A. But today, we're looking at creating test patterns. In order to do this, SpectraCal, since there are no test pattern generators on the market yet that do Dolby Vision or even HDR10, SpectraCal has worked to create test patterns that come out of the computer formatted for Dolby Vision with the metadata. So the whole point of this test here is to verify whether or not your system is doing it properly. So when you set up Calman, let's say you're using Calman and you're going to do your calibration, you're more than likely going to come out of the HDMI port or maybe a display port to HDMI signal to your Dolby Vision display. And you're going to have to make sure that there's no custom profile on your graphics card in your computer. We know they love to do this. We know they love to have some kind of custom thing going on. And this test pattern here, this part of the Dolby Vision workflow, is designed specifically to ensure that you are in Dolby Vision mode. There isn't any processing going on, and you'll immediately know on the top there. I think you'll see there's like Dolby Vision, there's a check mark, and on the bottom there's a check mark in SDR. So if you're in SDR, there's going to be a check mark there, and if you're in Dolby Vision, there's going to be a check mark there on the top on the test pattern, just showing you how to do it on the TV itself. Once you have that check and you're in Dolby Vision, you know you have a signal that has integrity that you can work with to do the calibration.
Got it. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, number 2, and we will take a look at that. Here we see, I guess this is pre-calibration, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I believe this is the pre-calibration chart here, where they're just taking some measurements to see how the display is performing and if there's anything you might need to address before moving forward with the next step as per a usual workflow.
Right, and this actually looks pretty good to me. I mean,
it does.
It's not bad for a pre-calibration. Now, the one thing I want to draw people's attention to is the EOTF, electro-optical transfer function, in the upper right corner, which looks a little different here than it does in when you're using gamma, right?
Yes. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Any calibrators on the viewing this will see that as you come up, it sort of focuses a little bit more on the specular highlights at the top end of the range, but it also comes out significantly differently. I mean, it's hard to explain without comparing. Maybe we should have made a chart that shows like a standard 1886 versus a little, versus to more to better show. But usually it would be coming out a little slower. That yellow line would be curving inward towards the bottom and then peaking towards the top. And this is almost opposite, but not quite opposite, where it comes out almost as a straight line and then it sort of peaks at the top, allowing for some of that detail there near the specular highlights.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I want to point out about EOTF, PQ EOTF in particular, which is what this diagram is showing, is that it is designed to be able to work all the way up to 10,000 nits, or 10,000 candelas per meter squared. We call them nits. It's the same thing. I like nits better because it's easier. And if a TV can't do 10,000, and there are no TVs today that can, it basically flattens out, and anything above the peak brightness of the TV, which today is around 1,000 nits, everything above that in the Dolby Vision signal just flattens out and becomes that 1,000 nits, which might seem a little weird, but what it does is, again, it future-proofs things, you know. So in 5 years, as you pointed out, we might very well have TVs that can do 2,000 nits or 4,000 nits. It'll be able to handle that. In 10 years, maybe we'll have TVs that can do 10,000 nits, maybe, but it'll handle it. So I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's actually pretty amazing, and it's part of why it's so exciting that these new formats and Dolby Vision is coming out here, so we can have this almost, I wouldn't say future-proof because things always get better, but something that allows us to more quickly get better. You know, it's something that does allow us to more quickly in the industry achieve better images. You could almost have a better image every year, you know, just like people update their cell phone every year. Maybe they'll start going, oh, I need to update my TV now because this new model adds another 500 nits to it. You know, I gotta have it. So
well, that us early adopters, that's for sure. Let's go on to the next slide here, which is, that's pretty simple. That's just showing us the white balance, which is hopefully the red, green, and blue being perfectly equal. They're not quite in this case. I guess this is still pre-cal.
This is actually, I can't quite read that. I think this is actually adjustment at this point, is you know, setting the white balance, or at least checking the white balance of the pre-cal. Now, Dolby Vision uses D65 for in the references, so they are targeting D65 on every display, just like we do in Rec 709.
By the way, D65 refers to the color of white. It's a point in the CIE chart, and this exercise right here that we're talking about is intended to get you as close as you can to that white point, which is labeled D65. So anyway, and we see here, just FYI, the first graph shows these red, green, and blue bars. The second one is labeled delta E, which is the error. How far away is that white point, that from D65? Is it close or is it far away? If the error is low, it's very close. If the error is high, it's pretty far away. This error is very low. So we would say that at this brightness level, whatever it happens to be, the white point is very close to where it's supposed to be, very close to D65. So whoever did this calibration got it pretty good at that brightness.
Yeah. Yes, they did.
This isn't you, by the way. This is data that was supplied to us by SpectraCal.
Yes.
But you know, you'd be happy with this result, wouldn't you?
I would be pretty happy with that. Yes. So
good. All right, moving on to the next one. Let's just take a look at that. Oh, this is very interesting. Tell us what we're looking at here.
So this stage is measuring the luminance, how bright it goes at the low end, how dark at black, and then how bright it gets at the top end. Now, most of the industry now that is working with Dolby Vision, and I think even HDR10, the people who are starting to work with HDR10, when they're measuring the peak luminance, they're measuring it with a 4% window, or what's known as L20, which takes up, it's a diagonal of 20% of the screen area, which I believe is a 4% of the pixels. I might be saying that wrong, but you measure white, and then you can also measure full max white. And you'll notice on this, it is a little different on the display they were measuring here, where you had 647 candelas in the window, and then you had 717 candelas at full white, which doesn't always happen. And then
usually it's the other way around, right? You get higher peak luminance in a small white window on a black background than you do when the entire screen is white.
Yes. Yep. Usually it is the opposite way around, but here in this data, they were able to get a brighter image when the whole screen was white. And then at the bottom there, they're using a pattern that's been designed to help deter the backlight, the dynamic backlight, from going completely off. What happens is when you have a set with a dynamic backlight, and Dolby Vision does use dynamic backlighting, a dual modulation display, where the backlight will change in its amount of brightness, luminance, voltage, power, etc., based on the image that's on the screen. Now, if you put up black, the backlight just turns off. So you measure black, it's not really realistic of what black may be on the screen itself, because, well, black just turns off. And how often are you watching a completely black image? So the white in the corners actually is designed to make it so the backlight doesn't turn off. It's sort of, here's black on the screen, but don't turn off the backlight completely, so we can get an accurate reading of what this backlight is doing. And that's what they're doing. They're measuring their minimum, measuring their maximum, and of course measuring the full field maximum to see what the light output is. And again, they're trying to target whatever the golden reference was for this display.
Do you happen to know whether the golden reference specifies that the peak luminance, what we're talking about here in the top two graphs, should be the same in a white window, a smaller white area on a otherwise black screen, versus the entire screen being white? Is that part of the golden standard? Because that's very hard to do.
I don't know if they specify that as part of the golden standard, but just in general, like, forget standards, just me speaking out loud here, as a display calibrator, I really want white to stay the same no matter if it's a small window or it's a huge window. It shouldn't really fluctuate. The display should just, here is my light output, this is where I want it, and then the entire display should just fall in line with where I want it. It shouldn't go, oh, well, this image is a little brighter, so I'm going to make it a little darker, or this image is a little darker, so I'm going to make it a little brighter, because it can. And we've seen that happen in plasma displays, and even some of the OLEDs that are out on the market now don't necessarily maintain luminance based on, the average picture level that is on the screen. But with
average, by the way, average picture level is if you take the bright little square and you take the dark black background and you kind of average them together, what do you get? It's going to be lower than it is when the entire screen is full white. So that's basically what average picture level is. And I agree with you, the white level, the peak brightness, should not change as the average picture level changes. But in plasma, I don't think it was possible to keep the full white the same brightness as a small window. With LCDs, it is possible to do. And with OLEDs, I'm not sure. We've seen a lot of OLEDs that don't do it. So that's a problem too.
Yeah, it's certainly a problem. I think when I looked at the Vizio Golden Standard that's in CalMan now here, I believe that the target is 800 nits, and I don't know if they're specifying in the standard to measure it at that smaller window. I think they are because of what CalMan has, but I'm not positive. That might be a good question for SpectraCal or Dolby in moving forward, because they clearly do measure the full field, they measure the window, and then they're also, well, they're measuring the black with sort of what's becoming more standard to measure black with the corners lit up a little bit to keep that
the little white corners. Yep. Yeah. Yep. Well, maybe we'll ask Dolby and Vizio next week at CEDIA. We're going to talk about that in just for a couple minutes here a little bit later. Let's keep going in the graphics, make sure we catch them all here.
So this is where you would adjust your grayscale. This is where you would start going through the adjustments that you have on the display. If you have a 2-point grayscale, 10-step grayscale, 20-step grayscale, as well as your gamma tracking, you could take a look at, well, I should say EOTF, your EOTF tracking, to make sure that you are doing the PQ curve.
Right. Okay, very good. And the next one should be the, this is the color.
Yep. This is your color gamut mapping or your color volume mapping. And again, here you're doing the same thing you usually would do. You're just targeting the golden reference, right? If we're talking Dolby Vision here, you're targeting this golden reference. And in this this screen capture here, you can see actually that it is it's larger than Rec 709. It's actually a little larger than, it looks to be a little larger than P3 at the moment as well. And that seems to be the golden reference that we have here for, and what does it say on the top there? I think this is, in fact, the Vizio RS65 unit that they were measuring. And it looks like they were measuring that with a Photo Research 740, which is really nice as well, up in the top right corner there.
Right. There you go.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Yeah, that Photo Research is a very nice meter. And this is what I was talking about earlier, is if you want a really nice meter, you're going to pay for it. That Photo Research 740 is what, 15, 20,000 bucks?
No, the 740 is, I think it starts around 30 with no options. It's about 30 for some, and it's a really big piece. It's like a foot long by like 6 or 7 inches high by like 4 inches wide. It's got liquid cooling. It's got a ton of great stuff, but it's yeah, the 740, the 655, the 670, I think they start around 13, 14. I think the 670 is around 18, 19. But they're all really nice meters, of course. And the 740 is considered one of the top of the line spectroradiometers in the world. And I think it starts around 30. I priced one once, and I think it came out to about 40,000 with all the options I wanted on it. So it's certainly
Maybe
not
someday.
cheap.
Maybe someday. Okay, moving on to the next slide. We'll just finish these up real quick. I think the next one is the post-cal, I believe.
Yep, that's the post-cal. So that's basically just showing you, of course, all of your end results, both color and grayscale on the same page, so you can get a very good overview of here's how the display is performing, and this is what your final measurements were. And then hopefully you are done with your optimization of Dolby Vision. It's very, very similar to a regular calibration in that you have your grayscale, you have your color gamut mapping, you have your white point that you're trying to hit in luminance. You even have D65 to target, but of course your gamma that you used to have, now you would go with your PQ curve instead. You'd focus on your EOTF, and then you would also focus on the golden reference color volume mapping that you would need to do in order to hit that golden reference for that particular display.
Right. SoCal Ray Jr. in the chat room is saying, no, it was a C6 profiled to a PR740.
Oh, did I read that wrong?
It looks like it. It's hard to see in this image right here, but that brings up the C6.
Oh, he's right. He's right. I just zoomed in on it myself, and it is a C6 profile to a 740. Well, Ray, they tried to pull a fast one on us, didn't they?
Now let's talk about the C6 for a minute, because that is a much less expensive meter that you can use to calibrate TVs, but it's a different type. It's not a spectroradiometer, which basically reads the entire spectrum of light as one continuous whole. Basically breaks it down to a bunch of different little tiny bands. A colorimeter, however, only measures red, green, and blue. And because the red, green, and blue might be different one TV to another, you need to actually do a process what's called profiling using a spectroradiometer to tell the C6, the colorimeter, this is where your red, green, and blue points should be. And so you need to do that with a colorimeter. Of course, a colorimeter costs a lot less. I forget what a C6 is now, but SpectraCal just introduced a new version of this meter, the C6 meter, for high dynamic range. So I think that's pretty cool. SpectraCal seems to be on the cutting edge of things here as we're talking about the transition from one system to the next.
They do. They do. I got that email this week as well, the C6, and I called them up. I was like, what's the real difference? They're like, well, it goes up to 1,300 nits, and some of the other, the older, of course, colorimeters, even some of the high end ones, and I shouldn't say it that way because the C6 is very good. But when you get up to the $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 colorimeters, even some of those older units on the market won't hit the light output readings very reliably, is from what from their spec sheets and whatnot. So it's very good that SpectraCal has, hey, we've updated our C6. We know now that we have a system here that can go up to 1,300 nits, and I don't think either Vizio display is rated up to 1,300 nits. I think they're around 800 nits, and I think going with something like that, if you're trying to do it yourself, if you're trying to do a low-cost calibration solution, that new SpectraCal C6 is a very good way to go, because you can measure some of these newer displays coming out with the high dynamic range, as well as have something that can measure the older displays and also get good support and integration into CalMan. If you happen to be using CalMan, you usually don't have to worry about the manufacturer not supporting their own product.
Right.
Yeah. So I see SpectraCal coming out with a lot of profiles for that new C6 for high dynamic range, for Dolby Vision. As those formats grow and come out and there's more displays, they'll probably be taking, if they were using that PR740 to profile, they'll probably take the 740 and profile the next display, whether it's Samsung or LG or Sony or Hisense. They'll be out there trying to keep it up to date for you.
Yeah. Well, we've got a little bit of time left and a little bit more to talk about. But before we do, I'd like to take a moment to thank our other sponsor for this episode, which is Epson. Epson's revolutionary EcoTank line of printers for home and office introduce a new age in printing. We've been talking about a new age in video. Here's a new age in printing. The new EcoTank ET4550 wireless all-in-one printer doesn't use ink cartridges. Instead, it features an innovative refillable ink tank. It comes with enough ink to print up to 8,500 pages, which is equivalent to about 50 ink cartridges, ready to print for up to 2 years. Powered by Epson's leading-edge precision core technology, it delivers high-speed, vivid colors and laser-quality black text. Plus, auto two-sided printing, a 30-page auto document feeder, and easy wireless printing from tablets and smartphones. All EcoTank printers deliver an unbeatable combination of convenience and value with ultra-low-cost replacement ink bottles. Now you have the freedom to print without running out of ink. Visit Epson.com/EcoTank today to transform the way your home, office, or work group prints. For the best combination of ease and value, turn to the new Epson EcoTank printers. That's epson.com/EcoTank. And we thank Epson very much for their support of Home Theater Geeks. Epson, exceed your vision. And in fact, we are talking today not about exceeding vision, but matching it a little more closely with high dynamic range and wider color gamut. Speaking of higher dynamic range, I just wanted to take a moment to talk about the other primary high dynamic range system, which is commonly called HDR10, which refers to the fact that it's a 10-bit system. Dolby Vision is a 12-bit system. And HDR10 is based upon the SMPTE standard EOTF called PQ. And but it's not really quite the same as Dolby Vision, is it?
No, I'm not 100% up on the HDR10 quite yet. It is still sort of in development, and I've had an opportunity to work with a few of the studios around town that are starting to master content. They're starting to look at content in HDR10, and it seems it's been a little more difficult to implement when you're going in, you're someone like me and you're trying to calibrate and you're going, well, what do we need to do? It's HDR10. What do you want me to do for for us to make sure that we're hitting what we should hit. And they're like, well, we're still kind of working on it and we're still kind of figuring this out here. So, okay, but what do we need to hit? And so of course we have this empty PQ curve and we do target that. And then we've in the few studios I've been into, it's been, let's try to get as much luminance out of the displays that they have that are, that they're working with to try and master. Well, how bright can this go? Can it do 200 nits? Can it do 800 nits? Okay, well, let's pick this because we know we have 3 of these displays and they all hit, let's say 800 nits. Well, let's make sure we're hitting that 800 nits. And then let's work with, I believe the studios we were working with were setting them up for a similar P3 for what they were looking at the time.
In terms of color gamut, yeah.
I believe so. There might have been one of them that was leaving it completely open native at the time, but it was all, again, we were all into testing at that stage. So it's very limited in terms of what they had. And part of what they were doing was testing and then testing it against Rec 709. So it was, well, let's take a look at what we can achieve here. And then let's take a look at the same thing in Rec 709, maybe on the same display next to it, but configured differently. And then let's see how much of a difference that is. Let's see what we're achieving. Let's see what we're able to do. And so there was a lot of that I was involved in, but there wasn't quite that much. And in the past few months, I haven't really followed with it. So there may be some updates that I'm missing here. So I don't want to be like the end all. Dave says there's not much there, but Dolby Vision sort of, especially with the Vizio coming out in the last month or so, has really released a bunch of, this is how you'd calibrate. This is the method we're going to go about it. This is how you're going to move forward with your customers as a calibrator like myself, or even Ray, who's in the chat room. That's sort of how we would move forward. And with HDR10, I haven't been able to get a lot of that out of the few people I know that are involved with it. A lot of it's, well, we're working on that. We're working on that. And there's this is proposed, but then this is proposed, and it could be this, it could be that. And they've got to be close. There's got to be a few people out there that sort of have a better idea of that direction and how you would move forward calibrating it. But for me, I know I've called a bunch of test pattern generator makers, and I've even said, hey, do you have anything that'll generate Dolby Vision patterns, with something with the metadata, so I can just hook up a generator and work from there first, or even HDR10. And just about everybody has said no. 1 or 2 test pattern generator makers have said, well, we're FPGA based, so we might have something soon, because they can, do a really software/hardware upgrade there.
Right.
So they're saying, keep an eye out. So I don't know what that means, but I'm assuming by end of year, I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that we'll have something that'll generate that. But there's not a whole lot of test pattern generation that I know of at all for HDR10 available to the public, even for purchase, like I was saying, a generator or whatnot. And the only thing I know in Dolby Vision is the SpectraCal software out of the computer itself. I don't know of any generators. I've called around, and I think that's going to be the same thing that we're going to have to focus on as HDR10 starts to roll out, as some displays start to actually, I know there's some displays out there that can be software upgraded now, and they say we can support it with an upgrade. They're just starting to ship, but they don't actually have it. And I haven't heard of any displays actually having it in the consumer world at this point.
Well, that's actually not true. The Samsung SUHD TVs do have it. It's implemented now. It's live in the field, as it were.
Is there content for that at the moment? Can you watch something?
No.
No. Okay. All right. So
except for, say, I think they have a hard disk server system, and if you buy an expensive enough TV, they'll give it to you, or maybe you have to pay a little extra, I forget.
Oh, okay.
But it actually has some movies on it in high dynamic range, and there are movies available from MGO in high dynamic range. I think Netflix as well, Ultraflix certainly. So there is some content, and it's all basically, most of it, except for that coming from Vudu. But some of these other sources, it's HDR10. It's this other format. And most of the TVs that can now, only from Samsung, or will be able to from the LG OLEDs and the Sony and the Panasonic CX850, they will all have HDR10. And so at the moment, more TVs have HDR10 capability than Dolby Vision. Dolby Vision, the only one, is the Vizio reference series. But there's a conundrum here, and that is Dolby Vision does not require a version of HDMI, the connection between things, called HDMI 2.0A. They can exist perfectly happily with HDMI 2.0. They don't need the little A, but HDR10 needs it. It must have it. And in fact, it must have it at the output of the device, which we'll assume it does. If you're going through an AV receiver, that AV receiver has to have HDMI 2.0A, and the TV has to have that input as well. So if the receiver doesn't have it, then again, like you were talking about earlier, the HDR10 data, metadata that defines how the high dynamic range is coded goes away. It's lost. So we're in a pretty Wild West kind of situation here, man. It's pretty tricky.
We are, and I knew that there were some sets shipping that they said will be software upgradable to HDR10. Obviously, the Samsung. I did not know that the update was out, and I had heard about the MGO with a number of. Go ahead.
I was going to say the Samsung SUHD TVs shipped originally with HDR10 capabilities, but they're the only ones. The Sony, LG, Panasonic, all claim that they will have firmware updates to add HDR10 capabilities, HDR capabilities to their TVs. As you say, though, I'm very skeptical about that. Not that I don't think it will happen. I think it probably will, but when and exactly how it will be implemented, we still don't know really. And then there's the problem of calibrating that. Unlike Dolby Vision, HDR10 doesn't have a golden reference to say, well, I'm going to do this TV this way and that TV that way. Nor, I think, does it have any scalability. I'm not 100% sure on that. But unlike Dolby Vision, which, as you've talked about, has this scalability where you only have to make the file once, and then if you get a better TV 5 years down the line, you can use that same file, and it will look better on the new TV. It will take advantage of the new TV's capabilities. I'm not at all sure HDR10 has that built in.
I don't think so, but again, I'm not quite sure. I do think I heard the other day, I was talking to somebody, and Sony did mention that they will have their software update. I want to say that someone said it's coming very soon and definitely before Thanksgiving. But again, I'm not quite sure on that. And, until we have it, we don't know. But I didn't know that the movies were already up on MGO for streaming. Yep. I did know they were coming. A number of people had mentioned MGO is where the movies are going. MGO is where a lot of their content was going to start going. And so it's interesting that that's already going. I'll have to check it out. I actually haven't had any clients yet tell me that they're using that on their displays yet. So, certainly some of the customers have these new Samsung displays, and I don't know of one yet that has said they've actually taken a look at it or mentioned anything about it.
So because the state of the TV industry is in such flux, I'm sure you get this question all the time. I know I do. People ask me, what TV should I buy? Or should I buy a 4K TV? Should I buy now? Should I wait? We saw this in the chat room just an hour ago. What's your answer to them?
I tell customers, if you don't need a TV now, if you're just wanting to upgrade and your TV's working fine, I tell them, hey, wait a year, wait till next year. Let's see what happens at CES this year and then make the decision. Because, if you wait for the announcement of the new sets, worst case, you buy one of the current sets for cheaper because they usually get discounted when the new ones start rolling out. Best case, you get something that's like, oh, thank goodness I waited because I was able to get that HDMI 2.0A, or I was able to get this new format or this new thing that wasn't quite right in last year's model. But right now, we're sort of in this transitional period where we've got HD's pretty much well refined, and it's matured quite a bit, and we're not too worried about the HD stuff anymore. But now we're talking about the higher resolutions, right? People say 4K, and you have, of course, your 2160p content that is Rec 709. That there's quite a bit of that out there now, and now you're just starting to get your HDR10 content, like we were talking about, and also our Dolby Vision content starting to roll out as well. And we're very much at the very beginning of that. And in my opinion, because of the fluctuation with things like HDMI 2.0A, because of the fluctuation with some of these formats and the dust settling between the formats and all the standards. And I mean, we know how it was. HDMI first came out, and we're all AV geeks. We know about the handshaking issues and the HDCP issues and everything they had, and they fixed it. Over time, software updates came out and new versions came out and whatnot. So for me, I'm sort of the cautious person. I tell my clients, hey, there's not a ton of content at the moment. I know the content producers would, slap me around for saying that, because they're going to say, well, we're not going to make content unless people have these displays, and you're telling them not to buy the displays, so we don't want to make the content.
Oh, man.
But, there's not a lot of content. At least for me, it's not enough compelling content. Maybe we have 10, if we look at MGO and we look at their place, maybe we have 10 or 15 or 20 titles. But, I want a lot more than that for me to invest in this newer display, this newer technology. And we're only a few months away from looking at CES and seeing what they have and what they have to announce. So for me, at this point in time, I'd say if you need a set, you buy a set, you try to get the best thing you can. There are certainly sets like the Samsung that offer those Evolution packs, and they try to offer some form of guarantee that you're not going to be obsoleted very quickly. But if you are just thinking about upgrading at the moment, I tell people to hold on. And even as a calibrator, I want you to buy a new set. I want you to get it calibrated. It certainly brings more work to me. But at the moment, it's sort of, hey, hold out, because January is not that far away. We'll get to see what's really happening. And we'll also see some of this dust settle. And hopefully some of these things come out. Like I'm calling around to places saying, I want an HDR10 and a Dolby Vision test pattern generator. I want to upgrade to my next generation, a test pattern generator that I'll be able to use for the next couple of years. And it was the same thing when 3D came out. 3D came out and there was very few titles and there was very few things. And then we had some displays that would do this format, but not that format. And then they all kind of settled on all the formats. Oh, we'll do the frame packing. We'll do the side-by-side. We'll do the top-bottom. We'll do a separate memory for calibration. And some of the very first ones I remember didn't have a separate memory for calibration. You could only have one memory, and it just sort of went into 3D mode. And I think that, that's the same thing that's sort of going to happen here. We're going to see some of these newer sets. It's going to be limited. I mean, like you said, some of these HDR10 sets don't necessarily have HDMI 2.0A, and we know that. And we're going to have to just use the internal apps, or there's going to have to be some form of an upgrade path in order to make it there. And I think I saw one or two manufacturers say that their sets that are shipping right now today will be upgradable to 2.0A through software. I think I saw one or two manufacturers release that very, very recently to customers, saying, oh, these few models that we're just now starting to ship, they're not 2.0A compliant right now, but the hardware's there, and through a software update in the very near future will enable that capability. I think I saw someone say that, but I could be wrong.
Well, as you say, we are in a serious state of flux, and we will see a lot more at CES next January. We'll probably, hopefully, see something at CEDIA, which is going on as this show is airing on the TWiT network. We're pre-recording it here, so by the time most people see this show or hear this show, you and I will both be at CEDIA, and I'm sure there'll be some interesting things to report from there. But for now, we can only speculate and hope for the best in the future when all of this dust will settle. It reminds me of the old HD days when high definition first started coming out. Again, there were few TVs, there wasn't much content, and yet look where we are now 10 so plus years later.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, we've run out of time. It just flew right by, and as I knew it would. We got pretty geeky here, but I want to thank you so much for being here and helping me geek out. That's Dave Abrams of Avocal. Be sure to go visit his website at avocal.com. Thanks so much, Dave.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
You bet. You can find me at avsforum.com. You can email me at scott@twit.tv. And you can follow me on Twitter at htgeekscott and at avsforum. You can always find previous episodes of Home Theater Geeks right here at twit.tv/htg and on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/twit Home Theater Geeks. Next week, we will be talking about what we all saw and heard at CEDIA. I'll be joined by my colleague at AVS Forum, Mark Henninger, also another journalist, Brent Butterworth, and probably another journalist that I might rope into it while we're at the show. So there should be a lot of interesting news coming out of CEDIA that I look forward to bringing you in the following week. So until then, geek out.